think. Yeah. Nope. Yeah, so this is Kraken 36, the U.S. Playbook, Part 2. I just wanted to review the beginning, then I was going to jump to the KGF strategy. We don't play chess. The sides do not start off equal, and by the end of the first term, even into the second, the ability of the Axis to destroy units within close proximity is enormous. The Allied situation is dire from the start and gets worse. Most games played online, even with the bid and with Axis victory. Therefore, the principles that guide this Kraken 36's Allied U.S. strategy playbook are to preserve the Allied starting units, to give ground where it is hopeless or prudent, to determine the place of battle when possible. The options we have independent. On the other hand, they are not entirely reactionary. The strategic defensive objectives remain the same. We must first save London, second save the Atlantic, third save Moscow, fourth Egypt, fifth India, and sixth the Pacific. In that order, in my view. The strategic objectives, offensive objectives, are perhaps a little different than the Axis powers, whereas they are going for either early London, middle Moscow, middle or late London, and an economy that is at parity with the United States. At war, the Allies are generally not going to take Berlin or Tokyo or even Rome. Rather, the Allies are going for a radical dashing of the economic ambitions of the Axis and a capitulation, keeping the Germans contained on the Russian front to the gates of Moscow and no further, kicking the Italians out of Africa, keeping them out of the Middle East, and containing the Japanese to a fight for China and Southeast Asia should give the edge to the Allies. Accomplishing a suppression of Axis ambitions is achieved in two ways: eliminate units on the board and his ability to make war. The former is obvious, the latter may not be. Destroying an enemy's ability to make war boils down to economics. Economics in this game is represented on the board by the cash values of the territories and the convoy zones on the map. In order to reduce your enemy's opponent's income, you can do one of three things: take possession of his territories, disrupt his convoys, strategically bomb his factories. Conversely, it means not losing your own territories to the aggressors. These factors determine our strategic offensive objectives. Destroying an enemy's ability to make war by disrupting his convoys can be a devastating strategy. Okay, I've already read. I'm going to skip down. And this is where I really got into the Japanese. Skipping down to having discussed how to destroy the enemy's ability to make war, we move on to how to eliminate the units on the board. How to do this with the resources on the board and the limited time before a catastrophe like the fall of London or Moscow or Bombay occurs is the crux of the game. Historically, it was agreed upon by the Allies that stopping Germany took primacy over stopping Japan. Let's skip down some more. Therefore, kill Japan or kill Germany first strategy has been developed. I prefer the KGF, and it was the agreed upon Allied strategic strategy historically. The big question is, can I pop Germany's balloon before Japan expands beyond control? The question has validity. However, mathematically it is nonsensical. If Japan's economy grows to 70 or 80, it would still be dwarfed by the combined Allied income that would result from the shriveling of the German Reich. Okay, so that is where I'm going to skip down then to the KGF, because that was a huge, the thing I wanted to get to. As to KGF strategies, the saving of the Atlantic takes priority because of the logistical needs of the Allies, particularly the Americans and the British. We must traverse waters. The Russians, Chinese, Italians, and Germans don't. We do. In fact, we cannot win without doing so. Aircraft would not be sufficient. Therefore, safe passage must be guaranteed. London must be saved. It may be lost, but it must be saved. Loss of any capital is a huge problem. The number of spaces on the board between Moscow and Washington is staggering. London is a necessary way station. Of course, without control of London, one ally is out of the game and is no longer producing combatants. If Moscow falls, Eurasia is in danger of being swallowed up. There is probably nothing between the Panzers and the Pacific Ocean. The economic situation is very dire. If the Russians were able to retreat some of their units if there's a strong British presence in the Middle East and North Africa, if the Chinese are still on the board, and if the Americans have already put boots on the ground in Eurasia, then there is hope. Better, it does not come to this. However, Napoleon did take Moscow, and then his army starved to death. The German troops that make it that far are probably not coming back anytime soon. They are an expeditionary force that will not return to Europe until around turn 8 or 9 at best. There is an opportunity here. He will have to stack soldiers for defense. This usually leaves his perimeter exposed. His perimeter includes an often naked Scandinavia, an exposed underbelly. Greece is particularly interesting because it is usually empty of enemies as well. As before, we need to begin with the end. What structure do we need to set up to deal a death blow to Germany? One obvious answer is to overwhelm him by putting more boots on the ground than he can. Therefore, we need an efficient transport shuck enabled by naval supremacy. Traditionally, this has meant leaving the East Coast and pushing in Sea Zone 91, and then proceeding from there to either Scandinavia or southern France or even Italy or Normandy. The other option is to take a longer voyage directly to England. This option is generally safer. The problem with 91 is that it can usually be reached by air units and any residual Atlantic fleet, and Axis subs from the Med that can somehow slip through Gibraltar. Italians and Germans can tag team the zone if need be. Thus, you need twice the fleet to protect the shuck. You need a formidable fleet at your destination, 106 for instance, and one at 91. Let me say that a fleet that draws the enemy's air to attack it is self-evidently going to draw units away from Moscow. Sometimes presenting yourself as a tantalizing target is strategically shrewd. The question that should be asked is, how many of his units might he lose, and can he replace them without ruining his ground game? The Canadian two-step. A shuck alternative that is extremely safe and effective but slow is walking your troops into Canada, Sea Zone 106, and shucking troops to Sea Zone 109, landing them in England. This is a 12 transport shuck, 4 traversing the Atlantic, 4 back to Canada, and 4 landing troops wherever. Sea Zone 109 can still be hit by bombers, but has the protection of scrambling fighters, 6 if you have them. Now, the most important thing about any shuck, or even an assault on a large scale, is the wave effect. They can see it coming, or not coming. A large assault on Normandy that will be handled differently by the enemy if he looks at way stations like Sea Zone 91 or Halifax and sees them empty. He can afford to throw everything at the invaders because they have no backup. He will have a breather, time to rebuild. What will we do with the shuck troops? Normandy is right there for you to land them at your discretion. Normandy is also right there, 2 spaces away from West Germany. There are 2 ways to approach this landing. One would be a constant drip of 8 units landing every round. Another would be a significant buildup, say double or triple that number, more transports. Either way, they are threatening and must cause the German and Italian players to marshal troops toward the west. What was true for Normandy is also true for southern France, unless you captured northern Italy previously or captured it simultaneously. General hand grenade is a proponent of this location because it requires so few transports to maintain the shuck. It will require 2 large navies to protect 2 vulnerable sea zones. Greece is a 16 transport shuck for the Americans and requires protecting 3 different sea zones. It is the most obvious blind spot in the Third Reich and could even be a one-off, sending 4 transports to their doom to accomplish the spectacular feat of placing 8 units behind enemy lines. Fun, at least, though probably not sustainable for the Americans. Scandinavia has many advantages. You can capture it and then build a minor factory. You can bomb West Germany and Germany back into the Stone Age. It will probably never be contested unless the Axis balloon is mammoth and he left a force behind in Karelia. The navies have to move together. New builds for England and our reinforcements might be vulnerable. Keep those planes at the ready for scrambling. The big question looms over Scandinavia: is this landing a rescue of Moscow or a second front? Aside from a lone tank sent to liberate territories and aircraft meant to help defend, the answer is a second front. You are right there. Across the water is Berlin. Don't take your eyes off the prize. Pressure on Berlin will force Germany to abandon its perimeter. You may have successfully peeled the onion one more layer. Normandy might be yours for cheap. Nibbling and sandbagging. From an optical standpoint, attacking Western Europe would seem to be the needed action. From an economic standpoint, however, keeping Germany contained to around 55 IPCs might be enough to prolong the war until the disparity widens in our favor. Therefore, we begin a section of the U.S. playbook on nibbling the edges and laying down sandbags that will hold back the flood and economically support what has been called Operation Ricochet. Moscow will be attempted. It is the crown jewel for the Axis. If America enters the war early, fighters can make their way to Russia by turn 5 or 6. If every Allied surviving aircraft that begins on the board turn 1 were to do so, it would provide a strong dike. Planes built by the English can launch from Scotland and make their way there. Planes in the middle of the board can fight the good fight and make a difference, and still make it to Moscow by 5 or 6. Anzac and Indian fighters can battle in Southwest Asia and can still make it. A factory in Persia built on turn 2 can produce units that can assist in the sandbagging of the Russian capital. Alternatively, 17 American bombers can make it to Moscow by turn 6. They can act as fodder, but more likely they would deter the enemy from ever attempting the assault. They could also be used to attack any lagging mechanized column that was supposed to ensure the success of the venture. This, however, makes establishing your shuck by turn 6 impossible. Other sandbagging areas include Yunnan and, by extension, Bombay, Egypt, London, New South Wales, and Hawaii. These are all Axis targets, assuming one is playing with the OOB victory conditions. Of these, Hawaii rests almost entirely in our hands. In the early game, it is easy enough to get 3 transports worth of troops to the island and a token destroyer blocker or 2. If we were to see Calcutta or Sydney about to fall, prudence demands an entire build or 2 be put towards securing the waters around the island, complete with destroyer blockers. This is more effective than turtling there. One could assume that the bulk of the IJN would be in the Indian Ocean. To get from there to Hawaii would take several turns. An air force and navy comparable to the enemy must be produced. Defensively, loaded carriers, battleships, and destroyers are amazing. Offensively, a fleet of subs and bombers can do incredible damage on the cheap with versatility for later asymmetrical warfare. Probably the most effective defense for the island proper would be a round of air power builds that could not be blocked from landing and be used for the offensive against the blockaders and the approaching fleet. We can give New South Wales aid. We may be able to create a better sandbag there than in Hawaii, combining our naval might with the Australian ground forces. This should make Sydney nearly impregnable until turn 7 or at the earliest. This is the worst-case scenario if and only if Bombay is in danger of falling or does fall. This could be made untenable if the enemy chooses Australia first. In such an event, however, Calcutta should become nearly impossible to capture, assuming an infusion of British units into the region via a factory in Persia, victory in North Africa, or even aircraft from South Africa. Hawaii must become Japan's final victory city. That should prove easy to defend given our industrial output and the strategies listed above. London may be sandbagged by some obvious and some oblique methods. The less obvious method is to draw the pack fleet into the Atlantic, letting Germany know that any Operation Sea Lion victory will be Pyrrhic. We can punctuate this by adding to the fleet immediately, if a fleet needs additional aircraft carriers, aircraft destroyers, and transports. Such a fleet needs additional aircraft carriers, aircraft destroyers, and transports. If kept out of the war, one might stage the fleet in Sea Zone 102. Given the green light, American aircraft could be launched from 102 and land in London during non-combat. As soon as America is brought into the war, ground units may do the Canadian two-step, move them to Canada, and then shuttle your ground forces to London, either in the combat phase for the recapture of the British capital or in the non-combat phase for reinforcements. The other sandbagging will have to be done by the British, specifically Egypt, Yunnan, or wherever you draw the line in China. As to nibbling the edges, I am calling this Operation Ricochet. The Axis flood rises high. Many areas might be covered, hopefully temporarily. For the enemy to reach the Middle East is no easy feat. With proper maintenance and investment, it should be an excellent area to begin taking back. For America's part, parking a fleet next to Gibraltar can aid the English effort, thereby instilling a sense of fear in the Italians. A build or 2 will be devoted to the potential defense of Rome. Those forces may never move for the rest of the game, nor be transported to North Africa, nor can open for Germany in the east. Meanwhile, you are free to choose from several edges where you might land: southern France, Greece, Yugoslavia, and Albania. Scandinavia is another choice that may be easily nibbled. Economically, it could be the money peninsula in Europe, given the gain-loss of IPCs and bonus income. It can even be the site of an American minor complex. Fade and strike. If some of the sandbagged areas are lost, a reserve force in the rear might easily retake the territory after the fighters have headed to their friendly bases and the ships quieted their guns. This I call a fade and strike maneuver. Bombay is a classic case for this, unless the Japanese are willing to lose an air force to gain a victory city with a minor complex on it. Such trades will most likely lead to short-term losses for you, but long-term gains. In the pack, the Caroline make an interesting get for naval operations. Iwo Jima or the Soviet Far East is more intriguing for air operations. Iwo Jima, however, is not an edge nor a nibble. Many like to move to coastal Australia and subsequently take back the Money Islands. Coordination with the Anzac Navy can tip the scale defensively in our favor, particularly when Japan is clawing for the quick capture of the jewel of the empire. This action might as well be called a naval showdown with the IJN. Planes could be launched like spears from the carriers and land in the thick of the Asian campaign. If planned properly, planes leaving can be replaced the same turn with planes arriving. I begin with the end. The goals of the strategic objectives that I've laid out have been to destroy the enemy's ability to make war and eliminate the units on the board. The work of laying down a floating bridge, GHG, by creating an efficient shuck that sets the Americans up to devastate the enemy by asymmetrical warfare while matching boots on the ground and planes in the sky with the Axis powers. The enemy's floodwaters might overcome a sandbagged territory too. Hopefully, instead of profiting by these conquests, they are spent and easily mopped up by reserves that don't have to contend with the Air Force or naval bombardments when they attack the weary defenders. Operation Ricochet depends on this. We have begun to nibble at the edges. The question then presents itself: which edges should we nibble? The short answer is the valuable ones. Remember that we are mainly attempting to dash the economic ambitions of the Axis. By my count, the Germans are making 47 pre-Barbarossa with 10 IPCs and national objectives. When they flood the Soviet Union, they can grab around 16 easily and stand at the gates of Moscow with 5 more IPCs from another NO. This is around 78 IPCs. The Allies cannot survive long if this endures. Robbing the Huns of Scandinavia reduces that income by 10 and forces them to sandbag or risk losing 8 more PDQ. Greece might be a stretch, but there are 9 IPCs in the vicinity. Most of them are near C-Zone 97. A fleet there would ensure the Italians stay home to defend, place the responsibility for recapture squarely on the German shoulders. Here we see the value of multiple fleets surrounding the enemy. He might be able to wipe out our troops in the Balkans, but he has to fear landings in so many areas that he must defend the capital and place the rest of his forces in a reactionary position. In the pack, from an economic standpoint, nothing jumps out at the Americans. However, if one assumes the responsibility for annihilating the IJN, the possibilities open up like a flower in May. Easily the best get is the Philippines with the NO. Malaya would be next in value for money made by the Allies via income and bonuses, as the theft and gain stealing one of the money islands disrupts $8+ of the enemy's revenue stream and puts some in your pocket as well. Economic area values: Americas 68, Europe 62, Soviet Union 37, Africa 21, Middle East 6, China and Korea 30, Southeast Asia 13, Pac Islands 10, Australia 10. Pac Islands 20, Australia 10. In addition, the starting values: Soviet Union 37, Germany 30, Japan 26, US 52, Great Britain 28, UK 17, Italy 10, Australia 10, France 19. Allies 163, Axis 66. Neutral pros I haven't added up yet. End of turn 1, not counting national objectives. Germany anywhere from 39 to 47, Russia from 35 to 37, Japan from 30 to 42, United States from 50 to 52, China from 7 to 11, Great Britain 25 to 31, UK 14 to 21, Italy 10 to 18, Anzac 10, France 8 to 13, or no income. The Allies at that point, at a low, might be at 141, might be at a high of 162. The Axis at that point would be 82 to a high of 107. Now, I also did the national objectives, but that's irrelevant to my point here. The question is, how much do the Axis have to earn in order to be unstoppable? This wouldn't account for the use of pieces on the board at that moment, but the growing sense of inevitability for future rounds. Obviously, greater than half or 51% makes sense. 134 is that number without adding national objectives. This also does not factor in the ebb and flow of income as territories are captured and lost every round. Young Grasshopper as a victory token that crystallizes this concept. I think his number is 144, though I think his includes NOs. If we assume Italy has been chased back to the continent and has 8, Germany and Japan must split the 126 between them, or 63 apiece. With all of China, Southeast Asia, the Money Islands, and the Philippines, Japan would earn 62. This must be the waterline for Japan. One can easily see how important it is to nibble early. The loss of Bombay has to be countered with a gain elsewhere or immediate retake. A doomed transport must retake an island or territory at this crucial juncture in the game. Germany, before Operation Barbarossa, hovers around 54. They can quickly shoot to 67 at the gates of Moscow. However, neither Germany nor Japan's strategic objectives are easy, particularly all of China and Bombay by turn 5 or 6. In addition, we have 4 turns of builds, around 240 IPCs to create the structure we need to stop the Axis from ruling over the world. This is one of the reasons Americans' actions must be somewhat independent of what is transpiring elsewhere. We are building a superpower from nearly scratch. Let me say it again, our logistical system of transferring units over water must be mostly complete by turn 4 or 5 at the latest so that we can match the industrial output of the Axis with our own. If the Axis and allies are receiving about the same income and we need to spend more on transports while they are buying tanks, we will lose. In addition, the United States must be able to affect the enemy's income by turn 6 or 7 at the latest. By affecting his income, I mean that it must be a permanent decrease. He gains the Caucasus but loses Norway, and then the Caucasus is recaptured. He gains Bombay but loses Korea, and then Bombay is retaken. These pressures preclude many of the options that I have earlier mentioned as possibilities. Any nibbling at these malignant empires must move the Axis further away from earning 134. One of the factors that I've skirted around in discussing nibbling the edges is the problem of dispersion. Unless you are on a floating flotilla crossing the channel with a ton of other guys, the Allies generally will suffer from being too few in number to face any serious segment of the enemy's ground game. On the other hand, it is Russia's job to do that. On the other hand, the call for the second front is real and urgent. Factories give you a hope of producing troops right there where they are needed. Scandinavia or Greece, for instance. These factories are often disappointing. However, a minor factory can produce enough units to nibble the edges. Doing so can keep our adversaries from earning more than the red zone 64 IPCs mentioned previously. These, though, cannot be relied upon to produce the death blow. Let me say it again for clarity. The U.S. needs to be putting 8 units or more in Eurasia every turn without interruption after turn 7. They need to be a cohesive fighting force that will achieve victory, defend with its British allies, and cause the enemy to bleed. This cannot be accomplished by several minor U.S. factories sprinkled around the periphery. That strategy is good for sandbagging, but is a band-aid and cannot achieve the critical mass needed for victory. It merely staves off defeat. The death blow. The grand strategy of the Allies and where America fits in. Victory in Europe probably requires a naval shock. You could just build planes or bombers and put 7 or 5 into Eurasia per turn, but you risk losing the Atlantic, London, and the Med, and every other strategic objective to minor investments in naval power by the Axis. As a reminder, you need to be adding to your navy regularly in order to stay ahead of any attempt at breaking the blockade, normally in the late game by an airstrike. Let's turn to a thumbnail sketch of our individual nations and their strengths. Russia is supposed to have the strength of a horde. 3 out of every 4 German casualties occurred on the Eastern Front. If the Allies can save Russia by flying in a ton of planes, she can fight her way back toward Berlin. Not to Berlin, but toward it. Usually by this time, Russia is needed to assist with a neglected Japan. Hopefully, she still has forces in Scandinavia. Russia can now scrape with the Jerrys over Novosibirsk. Novgorod. Russia should attempt to retake the south as soon as possible. There is a swath of 2s that runs around the Black Sea to south past Persia. Tangle with the enemy over these with the help of the British. Russia should let the middle, the area around the Pripyat marshes, be the battleground where Germany and Russia can trade territories and bleed out. Meanwhile, the British should push back on the Japanese from Southeast Asia, as well as launch from Russia into China to whittle away at that Japanese income. The Americans have a complex fighting force with mobility. Stay mobile. Historically, we pushed in and liberated Paris. This game rewards being in France, not Paris. Stay near your coast, your transports. Secure Normandy and buttress it. Make it impregnable. Meanwhile, new recruits are arriving. Keep them mobile. Move together with the English from one territory to the next. For instance, a drop of soldiers in Denmark sees the German drive them out with soldiers. These put those soldiers out of place. They can assist with West Germany, but cannot help with Paris or Germany. It is essential to create a growing sense of doom. The enemy is being nibbled from the edges by the Russians and the British. You are locked in an existential fight with the Hun. Grow, expand, having secured your base. Don't lose it without causing him to incur a great loss. Europe is yours to lose. Avoid going for it. Do not throw away your fighters or bombers to secure anything but the capital. If the Axis are sub 124 at this point in time, life is good. Stay the course. Don't make the big mistake. You might be winning. I've attempted to lay out a comprehensive strategy guide for America. Obviously, the way the Allies are currently being played is not effective. The game may be slanted. This playbook has always assumed that that may not be the case. I have not yet given up hope that with an economically driven strategy, the Allies can emerge victorious. It will not be round 8 unless you are either superior in skill or lucky. Against a skilled opponent, you are looking at nosing them out in the 11th to 15th round. I know this is beyond most real-time players, but friends, we do not play chess. We play Axis and Allies. Crockett 36 out. P.S. A note about attacking neutrals. I have never thought about it seriously, but 3 things have caused me to rethink my opinion. America can reach Spain and have room to breathe. If Germany captures it but doesn't destroy the Shuck, those troops are seriously out of position. Secondly, England can simultaneously grab Turkey and Saudi Arabia, gaining cash and access to Europe. Thirdly, Russia can grab Sweden if it takes Scandinavia, as I recommend. Obviously, you need to kill the resistance with minimal casualties by using air, artillery, and bombardment if possible. Also, I have and will continue to post Allied playbook material on my YouTube channel that is more step-by-step. Crockett 36. I aim to lay out 4 different U.S. step-by-step approaches, 2 KGF openers. One will be Plan Patton and the other Eisenhower. The 2 KJF openers will be titled Plan LeMay and the other Halsey. All right, guys, that is the Axis Allied playbook. The Allied playbook, and it's the American KGF, as well as sandbagging, nibbling the edges, and fade and strike, and some other stuff. All right, out.